Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren recently detailed how she'd pay for Medicare for all, following critics' attempts to corner progressives on the financing of single-payer healthcare. So far, Bernie Sanders, the only presidential candidate who wrote the bill, has refused to take the bait and attach himself to one specific or narrow way of funding it. But Warren wanted to get granular and find what she believed would be a savvy way to make people think that middle-class taxes wouldn't be affected with the passage of Medicare for all.
Will middle-class taxes go up to pay for the program?
On Medicare for all, costs are going to go up for wealthier individuals and costs are going to go up for giant corporations. But for hardworking families across this country, costs are going to go down, and that's how it should work.
Now, obviously, Warren dodged the question there. However, Sanders, on the other hand, keeps it 100.
Will you raise taxes for the middle class in a Sanders administration?
People who have health care under Medicare for all will have no premiums, no deductibles, no co-payments, no out-of-pocket expenses. Yes, they will pay more in taxes, but less in health care for what they get.
Here's the thing about this election. People are paying close attention. So evading questions like whether middle-class taxes are gonna go up can really become an Achilles heel. That's certainly the case for Warren, and unfortunately, she got goaded into doing something that I believe is incredibly risky by detailing how she would pay for Medicare for all. The fact of the matter is, there are many different ways to finance the bill, and publicly committing yourself to a specific proposal opens you up to a lot of criticism and nitpicking. That's exactly what Warren received in response to her proposal. First, before we do our own critique, I think it's important to give credit, though, where credit is due. I was personally skeptical about Warren's sincerity in supporting Medicare for all. But to her credit, she really does seem to back Sanders's bill of a true single-payer system that covers everything from vision to dental care. Understandably, some have noticed that her post on how to finance it doesn't specify mental health coverage. But remember, her post on Medium is not actual legislation. In fact, Warren has not written any legislation with regards to Medicare for all. The only presidential candidate who has is Bernie Sanders. Warren simply says she supports Bernie's plan, although I do wish she cited him more often, and that she just wants to provide the specific details on how to finance it. For those wondering, Bernie's Medicare for All bill is titled S1129. In separate documents, Sanders also offers financing options. On the Sanders Senate website, there is a page titled Options to Finance Medicare for All. Now, Sanders hasn't attached himself to a single detailed financing plan. Honestly, that's most likely because it just doesn't make sense at this point. These are the types of things that get negotiated in Congress anyway. But determining the potential sources of revenue that can be used to finance Medicare for all demonstrates that it can be paid for without getting so specific that your proposal then becomes victim to presidential election season nitpicking. That brings me to the biggest issue I have with the plan that Warren released. She was baited into doing exactly what her opponents wanted her to do.
My plan does not increase taxes on the middle class by 1 penny, not 1 penny.
Yeah, but the problem is her plan absolutely does indirectly raise taxes on the middle class. She has made a political calculation to avoid saying that she's raising taxes on the middle class, and I think she's needlessly setting herself up for failure. Her messaging could have been straightforward and honest about, yes, taxes going up, but overall healthcare costs going down with the elimination of copays, deductibles, and premiums. Warren's proposal includes a section on how employers will pay into the system. She writes, quote, American companies are already projected to pay nearly $9 trillion over the next 10 years, mostly on employer contributions for employee health insurance and on health-related expenses for employees under workers' compensation and long-term disability. Instead of these companies sending those payments to private insurance companies, they would send payments to the federal government for Medicare in the form of employer Medicare contribution. Companies will pay less than they otherwise would have, saving $200 billion over the next 10 years. Damn, that sounds pretty good, right? Well, let's break down how this would work. To calculate their new employer Medicare contributions, employers would determine what they spent on healthcare over the last few years and then divide that by the number of employees of that company in those years to arrive at an average healthcare cost per employee at that company. Employers would then take that average cost, adjust it upwards to account for the overall increase in national healthcare spending, and multiply it by their total number of employees that year. Their employer Medicare contribution would be 98% of that amount, ensuring that every company paying for healthcare today will actually pay less than they would have if they were still offering employees comparable private insurance. What Warren is referring to here is known as a head tax. While the plan really does sweeten the deal for employers because they would theoretically spend less on providing healthcare for their employees, it does incentivize them to spend less on healthcare for their employees leading up to the implementation of Medicare for All. As the Washington Post reports, analysts have warned that companies would have strong incentives in the years before such a law's enactment to make it appear as if their healthcare costs are low. There are other loopholes too, which I'm really concerned about. For instance, employers with less than 50 employees would be exempt from the employer Medicare contribution to the federal government. Independent contractors and the companies that hire them are also exempt from paying the tax. Obviously, this encourages companies to possibly stop hiring after 50 payroll employees while relying more on contractors to avoid paying the Medicare head tax. Keep in mind that the head tax Warren is proposing is different from the Medicare payroll taxes employers pay today. According to the People's Policy Project, the Medicare payroll tax charges a specific percentage of each worker's earnings, while the Medicare head tax charges a specific dollar amount per worker. Another way to look at this, and this does simplify things a little bit, is to think of two different companies with 100 employees each. If company A consists of 100 minimum wage workers and company B consists of 100 employees earning $100,000 a year, both businesses would actually pay the same amount under Warren's Medicare head tax, which makes it regressive. Bernie Sanders actually called Warren out on this, telling ABC News that, quote, "I think that would probably be a very negative impact on creating those jobs or providing wages, increased wages and benefits for those workers. So I think we have a better way, which is a 7.5% payroll tax, which is far more, I think, progressive because it won't impact employers of low wage workers, but hit significantly employers of upper income people." Warren's proposal also mentions using tax revenue from newly legalized immigrants following comprehensive immigration reform, which is not an easy thing to pass. Now, Warren states, quote, "Based on CBO's analysis of the 2013 comprehensive immigration reform bill, experts project that immigration reform would generate an additional $400 billion in direct federal revenue." Look, $400 billion is a drop in the bucket, and it's not like the very existence of Medicare for All hinges on passing comprehensive immigration reform. But including what some might refer to as a poison pill in healthcare legislation is a strange move politically, especially when Warren's clearly not willing to take the political risk of admitting that middle-class taxes would need to go up to help pay for Medicare for All. Warren's defenders said her proposal just provides options and that we shouldn't be too concerned with every tiny little detail. In fact, Representative Pramila Jayapal wrote on Twitter, "Her language on possible pay-fors is confusing, but I confirmed with her campaign that immigration reform is just an option. You can pay for it many other ways. Hers is a financing plan, not new bill. Why don't we celebrate that she embraced Bernie Sanders' plan and is fighting centrists?" Yeah, look, that's great, and that would be great, but Warren has taken credit for something that Bernie already did long before. And then she started taking jabs at Sanders to make it appear as though he hadn't even thought about how to pay for the very legislation he wrote.
I have a plan for Medicare for All, and I'm proud that it's the first healthcare plan by anyone in this presidential primary that lays out the full cost and how to pay for it.
Come on. Again, that's not true. Sanders released options on how to pay for Medicare for All well before Warren did. And based on what Representative Jayapal is saying, all Warren did was release her options for financing Medicare for All. Finally, Warren is unclear on how long she would take to implement Medicare for All. How long would the transition period be? She mentioned that it is a long-term goal, at least 4 separate times, and later writes, every serious proposal for Medicare for All contemplates a significant transition period. In the weeks ahead, I will propose a transition plan that will specifically address how I would use the time to begin providing immediate financial relief to struggling families, rein in out of control healthcare costs, increase coverage, and save lives. The wording in her proposal is so confusing that I actually thought she was aiming for a 10-year transition period. But Representative Jayapal claims that Warren is supportive of a 4-year transition, which is outlined in Sanders' plan. I guess we'll find out in the weeks ahead. But whether Warren likes it or not, she took a risk by playing into the framing of her moderate Democrat critics and has now attached herself to what some believe is a flawed financing plan. Did you know that TYT Network is now available on YouTube's new streaming platform, YouTube TV? Get access to full TYT episodes and exclusive shows by signing up for YouTube TV today. All new subscribers get a 7-day free trial, so head over to youtube.tv and search for the TYT Network channel.